Tina here, and in this episode we're gonna go through how to sew paper on cords. So there are a couple of things you're gonna need to sew your paper together. First of all, of course, you need some cord to sew the paper to. I just use this simple jute cord, which is quite inexpensive. Secondly, you need some thread to sew the paper together with. I like to use this waxed linen thread because it's very strong and also it doesn't tangle very easily because of the waxed layer on the outside. Then of course you need a needle for your thread. You also need an awl or a saw to make some holes on the spine. To make the holes, it can be nice to have a couple of clamps or something heavy to put on top of your paper stack, and also a ruler to make a straight line for the holes you need. This paper has been sitting in the book press for at least 24 hours, so it's time to take them out. Now, these papers have already been folded and sorted into signatures. A signature is simply just a stack of paper, usually between 4 and 8 pages, depending on how thick your paper is. I've used 4 sheets of paper in each signature because this paper is quite thick, and in total here I have 22 signatures. Right, so I've lined up all my pages perfectly and put this heavy stack of books on top just to keep it in place. The lines I make on the spine now are going to appear as ridges on the spine later. So this is kind of the point where I decide the design of the spine. In addition to the lines I make for the ridges, I also have to add one line at either end of the spine. So for example, if I want 4 ridges on the spine, I have to make 6 lines. And I'll show you why that is later. So here we have marked all the holes we need to sew the paper together. The 2 lines at either end here will not appear as ridges on the spine, while the other 4 will appear as ridges. So when I start punching my holes, I want to make sure to keep the same order of the signatures here. So I'm gonna grab one signature here, punch the holes, and put it this way over here, and then continue to do the same thing so I keep the order of the paper. The reason I do this is just to make sure that the holes will line up perfectly when I start sewing it together. I'm gonna find the middle of my paper and fold it the other way around like this so that they line up. Lie it down, grab my awl and punch the holes like that, fold it back together, and then I'm just going to continue to do that through the whole stack, which is going to take some time. You can also use a small handsaw or a coping saw to just clamp the paper together and saw the holes. The only thing is that when the paper is stained, it's more fragile, so I wouldn't recommend using a saw when the paper is stained. But I have used a saw with regular paper and it is a lot faster. But you can also risk making larger holes than you want to, which is the reason why I prefer to use an awl. So I'm going to continue to do this for a little while, so let's just fast forward to the point where we can start sewing. Now, when it comes to actually sewing the paper together, you will need either a proper sewing frame or you can use any square frame you have. So personally, I really like to use this chair. Let's start the sewing. So I will grab my linen thread and I will grab about an arm's length at a time to make it more manageable. And I'm just gonna leave it like this. You can also do this to make sure the thread won't come loose. As I'm gonna have 4 ridges on the spine, I'm gonna have to tie 4 pieces of cord to the frame. And because I like the ridges to be a bit thicker, I'm gonna just twist it and tie it double like this. But you can also just use a single cord. I'm gonna twist it fairly tightly and just wrap it around and tie it down here as tightly as I can. And there we go. Got my first signature here. So now I'm just gonna make the cords line up with the holes on the spine. And now we can finally begin sewing. Right, so I'm just gonna begin at one end here I'm gonna sew from the outside in into the very first hole. And I'm gonna leave about this much of the length so that I can tie it together with the next signature coming over. Now I got the thread on the inside. I'm gonna bring it, just poke it out here, out from the next hole. I'm gonna make sure the needle is on this side of the thread so I can wrap it around it. So I'm grabbing my thread, wrapping it around the cord, and putting it back into the same hole I just came out from. And I'm gonna make sure to tighten that knot. I'm gonna do the same thing with the next cords. Bring it out, make sure nothing tangles on the inside of the signature, wrap it around the cord, and poke it back through the same hole. And I'm gonna continue to do that until I get to the very top. Okay, so we got our first signature sewn on. I'm going to try to tighten it without ripping anything. So now I'm going to bring my next signature, making sure to keep the order that I punched the holes in, and just poke through the first hole in the signature. I don't want to tighten it too hard up here, like they shouldn't stick together like this. It should be a little bit of a leeway. And then I'm going to continue to do the same thing I did, poking out this hole over the cord on this side and go back through the same hole and wrap it tightly around the cord. We're gonna do that until we get to the bottom of the signature. Now we got our thread on the outside down here. So we're gonna grab the little piece of thread that we left out earlier. So I'm just tying these together in a regular double knot. Just like that. And I'm just gonna leave the length of the thread there and we'll cut it off later. But now we can just continue to sew into the third signature, still making sure to keep the order we made when we punched the holes. And we're just gonna sew the same way to the other end of this signature, around the cord, into the same hole, and onto the next. Now that we're at this end, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna wrap the thread underneath the previous one, just like this. So it ties around the ring we made earlier, like that, and then I can continue to sew directly into the next signature. And I'm still making sure not to tighten it too much at the end here. As you can see, I'm almost out of thread, so it's time to extend this thread. I like to tie it as closely to the inside of the corner here as I can. Push it to the corner here, and then tie a knot around there. And that should stick fairly well to the inside of the corner here. And still, I'm not gonna touch the ends here because we're gonna cut that off later. Now I just have to thread the needle on the other side and continue sewing. And then when I get to the end here, I'm just gonna thread it under the previous signature. Just like that. And continue sewing into the next one. But this is gonna take a while, so let's just meet up when we're getting close to the end. After a lot of sewing, we're finally here at the end. So I got my thread on the outside here. And to finish this off, I'm simply gonna thread underneath the previous one, like we always do. And then I'm gonna make a knot right here. Like that. And I don't want to do it too tightly, but make a nice knot. And I'll do it one more time just to really secure it in place. Like that. And we can cut the thread. Now that we have our entire text block sewn together, we can simply just cut it loose. Alright, so now we can attach the end sheets. Here's the cardstock that I want to use as my end sheet. Some nice dark brown. And I've also got this A3 size paper, which is the same size as the sheets I used in the text block. So to cut out the end sheets, I'm just gonna align this paper. I'm gonna add about 2 to 3 millimeters on either side to make the end sheets just a tiny bit bigger than the pages themselves. And just cut it out with a pair of scissors. You can also use a box knife or an X-Acto knife to make these cuts. So now we're gonna grab our text block. So first I'm just gonna shape the spine slightly. And you can either use a mallet to hammer the spine, or you can just, if you haven't sewn it too tightly, which you shouldn't, you should be able just to mold it with your hands. The glue we're gonna use is white PVA glue. This is specifically made for bookbinding, together with a brush. This is just a very cheap, simple glue brush, and this can easily be rinsed and washed afterwards, so you can use it multiple times. I'm gonna put a strip of about a centimeter, half an inch, something like that, along the edge here, and then apply it to the text block. We're just gonna put it here, align it with the spine. And there we go, a nice line of glue. Everything looks straight and I'm happy with the curve. I'm just gonna go ahead and tighten the screws. Now I got the text block in the book press. It's looking straight, it's got the right curve. So now I can go ahead and apply one layer of glue to the spine. And this is simply just to give the spine some strength. I'm gonna leave this to dry in the book press overnight so that it's completely dry before we move on to the next step. But we basically have a complete text block now.